Right friends, this is very important lecture on inflation, and please listen cautiously and carefully. And before going ahead, I would like to reiterate, we discussed about the terminology in the terminology part of 15, and please view that first. We deliberated the difference between WPI inflation, CPI inflation, and let us go ahead. What is inflation? Inflation is the rise in general price level over a period of time, and it is a common problem for the developing countries with high growth rates, and tackling high inflation is the problem for countries like India, whereas not having proper inflation is the problem faced by some developed countries. Some of the developed countries have kept the inflation target of 2%, but they are struggling to achieve that. What I mean to convey is, having inflation, or you can say more inflation, is the problem of developing countries, whereas not having inflation is the problem of developed countries. Let us go ahead. If inflation is too high, then it leads to loss of value of currencies, and if the aggregate supply of goods is not up to the demand, inflation may take place. So here, when the demand is more than supply, inflation may take place. We are going to deliberate on the reasons for inflation in detail, and two ways of measuring inflation. One is wholesale price index as well as consumer price index, and we deliberated in detail in the terminology part. And please don't forget about core inflation. Core inflation is if we subtract the volatile items such as fuel and food, because fuel items, food items are highly volatile, and to look at the status of inflation in the real economy, then we have to exclude fuel and food from the index. Then it is known as core inflation. So core inflation reflects the true state of economy. That is very important, right? WPI, CPI inflation, and as well as core inflation we discussed in the terminology part as well as economic survey. Then inflation is sustained increase in the general level of prices for goods and services. It is measured with reference to the period normally 1 year ago. If I say inflation for the month of May 2017 is 5%, it indicates that the rise in prices in comparison to May 2016 is 5%, and it can be due to demand pull factors, cost push factors. And please don't forget the difference between inflation, deflation as well as disinflation. These things we deliberated in the terminology, and this also we discussed. This classification is not sacrosanct but vary from source to source. Please understand what is the terminology here, right? Let us go ahead. Types of inflation because of the factors. This is types of inflation based on percentage increase, and here several times you come across terms like hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is the problem being faced by Venezuela at present. And if you look at the types of inflation based on the factors, one is cost push inflation, the other one is demand pull inflation. And cost push inflation, you can say, primarily due to supply side factors, and at the same time there are some structural deficiencies in the economy also. Because of structural deficiencies also, the costs will increase. So cost push inflation is when the rise in prices is due to higher cost of production. What are the reasons for it? We will come to know about them in a few minutes from now. And demand pull inflation is when there is an excess demand for goods over their supply, when there is more and more money in circulation, and when banks are willing to lend at lesser interest rates, when more and more money in circulation, then it may lead to demand pull inflation, right? So cost push, demand pull. Cost push can be bifurcated into supply side as well as structural, right. So, causes of cost push inflation, please listen carefully. Cost push inflation is because of supply side constraints as well as structural problems. Now, let us look at supply side problems. When there is a scarcity of raw materials, it may lead to higher costs and may result in cost push inflation. And let us assume the cost of sand as well as the cost of these stone crusher chips increased because of scarcity, then building construction will become too costlier. So, this is one example of scarcity of raw materials. So, when scarcity of raw materials is there, it is the supply side problem, and because of which cost push inflation can take place. Second one is when there is a scarcity of labor. When sufficient labor are not available, nowadays people say that Mahatma Gandhi Narega, because of Mahatma Gandhi Narega, the availability of labor for agricultural purposes in rural areas reduced, and such type of problems. That means when there is a scarcity of labor, then the costs of production may increase because of higher labor costs. So, this is one of the reason for cost push inflation. Next one is the government's policy of minimum support price for agricultural produce. For agricultural produce like rice, wheat, based on the recommendations of CACP, government fixes minimum support price, and sometimes the fixation of minimum support price may contribute to inflation, but please don't forget the other side of the story also. Even with minimum support price also, farmers are not able to come out of distress. So, when you look at inflation with regard to the policy of minimum support price, please don't ignore the second side. Then increase in indirect taxes. When indirect taxes like sales tax, excise duty, value added tax, when these types of taxes are increased, then it may result in higher prices and hence cost push inflation can occur. Let us assume government today increased the taxes on petroleum products, then it will lead to cost push inflation. Then if you look at the next one, 70 to 80% of our crude oil needs are met through imports, and when there is a rise in crude oil prices internationally, then cost push inflation can take place, and at the same time we are dependent on foreign countries, especially oil seeds, and at the same time last year we imported pulses also. And this year the pulses production is expected to go up to 22 million tons, hence imports may come down. But last year around 5 to 6 million tons of pulses we imported, and when the international prices increases, then it may lead to cost push inflation. Then after independence we followed mixed economy, all of you are well aware, but lot of protection and prominence was given to public sector. Public sector was protected a lot, and what the government has done from 1950s to around 1990s to protect the public sector, government kept high prices for the products and which are exclusively produced in the public sector. So, certain items at that time in those days were reserved for public sector, and to protect the public sector from going into losses, then the price protection given led to the supply side, or you can say cost push inflation. However, please remember, after the new economic policy, lot of liberalization took place, and this point may not have much relevance nowadays. But one important point, please don't forget, the inefficiency of defense public sector undertakings still is a problem, and probably that is resulting into the higher cost of defense products, right? Uncontrolled migration to urban areas is resulting into too much pressure on the resources, and because of which the prices of urban lands and buildings skyrocketing in urban areas. Especially urban land is in scarcity, because of scarcity of urban land, because of mass migration from rural areas to cities, this skyrocketing of prices is taking place. For cost push inflation, structural factors are also there. Structural factors are also reason for cost push inflation. Poor quality of education in government schools and poor quality of health infrastructure in government hospitals. Because of poor quality of education, because of poor quality of health infrastructure, human resource development will not take place. Because of poor human resources, skilled manpower will not be available, and that is the structural problem in our country. So, the structural problem because of poor quality of education, poor quality of health infrastructure is because of poor quality of this social infrastructure, then human resource development will not take place, which result in less skilled manpower and less healthy manpower, and that is one of the reason, and government has to do a lot to eliminate this structural bottleneck. These are structural in nature because it takes years to eliminate these problems, and structural changes are required in the governance of the country. So, that is why they are termed as structural factors. If you look further, structural factors, corruption and lethargy in government sector is one reason, and nowadays because of digitization and at the same time because of information and communication technology, these things may change to some extent. Then poor economic infrastructure, even though the government is making many efforts, when you look at the social infrastructure, the quality is not up to the mark. When you look at economic infrastructure, still we are not able to compete with the world-class standards. So, these are the structural factors which may result in cost push inflation, and these are to be eliminated, but this is a long drawn process. Please understand. Then causes of demand pull inflation. When government increases public expenditure, it will create demand and leads to demand pull inflation. So, when the government increases its expenditure, then demand will be increased and it will lead to demand pull inflation. Then when the salaries of public sector enterprises or government sector are increased, recent example is the implementation of pay commission recommendations and one rank, one pension for the armed forces people. And because of these things, what happens? More money in circulation and it may push inflation because of more demand. So, whatever the points I have written here, they are the reasons for demand pull inflation. We are discussing causes of demand pull inflation. Then when government resort to more and more deficit financing, when government borrows more money, then what happens? Money supply will increase in the economy and it may result in demand pull inflation. Then when the Reserve Bank of India resorts to expansionary monetary policy, when Reserve Bank of India resorts to expansionary monetary policy, what happens? More and more money will be in the circulation. Then because of which the interest rates will reduce and because of which more demand will be created for the goods. Then the next point is when there is lot of black money in the system, then what happens? It raises the demand and leads to inflation. Then population growth, that too more young population, then the aspirations will be more and the young population normally go for more advanced gadgets and more consumption expenditure, and which ultimately results in demand for goods and hence demand pull inflation occurs, right? So, these are the reasons for demand pull inflation. We discussed cost push inflation. Cost push inflation can be due to supply side problems as well as structural factors. Then demand pull inflation, we discussed various aspects, and the next step is inflation and its consequences. Most important aspect is poor will be affected badly and the persons in informal sector are affected badly, and as most of the poor are working in informal sector, so the poor people are ultimately worst affected because of inflation. Here you see below poverty line people will be the worst affected because of three reasons. One is they are mostly working in informal sector and their wages are not indexed. You see, when a government employee is there, every 6 months his salaries are increased depending on the increase in consumer price index. Based on consumer price index for industrial workers, the governments increase the salaries of the government employees, but there is no indexing for the informal sector. So here below poverty line people will be worst affected because their wages are not indexed. Then most of them are in informal jobs. And another important aspect is indirect taxes affect poor and rich alike, but in times of inflation they may not bear the burden, right? So because of these reasons people below poverty line will be worst affected. Then as more than 90% people are working in informal jobs, inflation puts a heavy burden on these employees as the salaries are not indexed to inflation. Then because of inflation, exportable goods may become non-competitive in the international market. Because of the reason, the cost of production in our country will increase. Because of increased cost of production, then they may not become globally competitive. The next one is inflation causes inequality in the distribution of income, and it is generally observed that during the periods of inflation, profits tends to rise faster than wages. Profits tends to rise faster than the wages. So because of which rich will become further rich and poor will be the worst affected. Next point is inflation promotes speculative activities in the economy. Because of inflation, speculation will increase, and normally in times of inflation there will be lot of speculation in urban lands. In urban house sites, there will be lot of speculation in times of inflation, and at the same time stock markets may also rally in times of inflation sometimes. Next one is inflation threatens the flow of FDI because of the reason it leads to rise in the cost of inputs in the domestic market and fall in the purchasing power of foreign currency. When inflation is there, then it will give rise to the cost of inputs in the domestic market, and because of which the fall in the purchasing power of the foreign currency. So that's why they may hesitate to come to the country and they may look at other destinations. And rapid rise in prices hinders the process of growth as it raises the cost of production. The fallout of inflation is because of rapid rise in prices, it affects the growth process, and this is because of the rise in costs of production. Next one is inflation adversely affects the savings on the part of the people as they have to pay higher prices. So the point to note is two important things. Because of inflation, savings will be affected. Savings as a whole in the country will be affected, and I will explain you what is the fallout of fall in the savings as a next point. And not only that, the second important point is rate of return will be reduced and senior citizens will be worst affected. What is real rate of return? Real rate of return is nothing but interest minus inflation. When inflation increases, then real rate of return will be reduced, and because of which senior citizens are the worst affected. And another point is, I have told you, because of reduced savings, when there is lot of inflation, costs will increase, savings will be reduced, and because of reduction in the savings, what happens? Capital formation undergoes a serious setback. What is capital formation? Capital formation is the investments in capital assets like heavy machinery. Investments in capital assets like heavy machinery will be reduced because the savings will be reduced. Then the next point is inflation affects poor much more than the effect on the rich, and this is most important point to note. So we have seen inflation and its consequences, and what are the measures taken by the government to control inflation? There are fiscal measures. Fiscal measures means it talks about public revenue, public expenditure, and this fiscal policy, monetary policy, we are going to deliberate in the later classes. and fiscal measures, that is public revenues. The government raises the rate of direct taxes. When the rate of direct taxes is raised, what happens? It reduces the purchasing power of the rich people and hence it reduces the aggregate demand. Then public expenditure. Inflation is controlled by decreasing the public expenditure by the governments. So these are the measures under fiscal policy. And under monetary policy, bank rate, Reserve Bank of India increases the repo rate. That means overall interest rate structure will be increased. Then RBI may resort to increasing CRR or SLR ratios, and because of which money in circulation will be reduced. And third one is, in times of inflation, RBI sells government securities and hence sucks excess money in circulation. So this is monetary policy. We are going to deliberate in detail. Then price policy. This is price control of essential goods. Prices of certain essential goods are controlled with a view to ensure their availability to all the sections of society, and the recent case is price control mechanism with regard to the onions, pulses in the open market. So government resorts to price control of essential goods, and the other important aspect is this: governments procure essential commodities, especially food grains, at the price fixed by the government and distributes them through public distribution system. And as and when government feels that there is a crisis, then government intervenes, and because of market intervention, it controls the prices in the open market, and sometimes it also resort to the distribution of essential commodities through the public distribution system. Right? So these are the measures under pricing policy, and measures to be taken by the government to control inflation in the long run. These are to eliminate structural deficiencies in the economy. One is reducing corruption and lethargy, most important. Improving transparency through ICT and digital payments. Then creating world-class infrastructure. This is very much essential. Overhauling of labor laws, land laws, creating world-class logistics infrastructure. So these are the long-term measures required to be taken by the governments. Right? So with this, let us conclude the chapter on inflation. So this concludes the 15th chapter, and another 9 are left over, both in terminology and lecture part. And most important aspects left over are national accounts, then fiscal policy, monetary policy, money and banking, that means various banking related terminology, as well as how the banks and NBFCs functions, and what about the financial infrastructure available in the country. You should have clear idea about those things. So that concludes our economy series, 24 lectures, 24 terminology, and already 10 Q&A available. So I hope to finish them before your civil services preliminary exam. So have a nice day. Thank you.